What's up, everybody? Ben Raza and Matt Gajeski here, and we're back for more Betting You season previews. We've talked about a couple conferences already, the SEC, the ACC. If you want those videos, they're on this very channel. Today is the Pac-12, the last ride for the Pac-12 before they are merged with conferences we may not even ever break down. But that doesn't matter. Today, we're going to talk about all those teams. I'm interested to see we have not talked about this, Matt, before the show or anything. So I always like to ask you this before we dive into USC and Oregon and all these teams, your general thoughts on the Pac-12.
I love the Pac-12. I love it from a viewing perspective. This is a conference that's very exciting in terms of offenses, expecting that this year. Sometimes defensive play gets a little questionable. I think people are kind of down on the conference in general because they haven't been represented in the playoff. They cannibalize each other quite a bit, but that doesn't mean the football's any less exciting. If you're looking for fireworks after dark, come to the Pac-12, especially in what looks like it might be the finale for this conference.
It definitely seems like this could be the last dance for the conference, but you know what? That makes it even all the more interesting to see. Can they get a playoff team? What else can we find for them? And before we dive into that, before we get into the win totals, maybe some playoff previews, things of that nature, I do just want to quickly say, if you're just joining us here at OddsShopper, if you've stumbled in and you are ready for the season like we are, welcome aboard. All things betting, from college football, of course, to NFL, to baseball, anything that you guys want, we've got on this very channel. So if you want to, hit the like button, subscribe, stay a while. All of those things really, really help us. But enough about that. I am ready to dive in if you are, and let's see what we can do. I'm actually going to bring up DraftKings so we can follow them on the win totals, and let's see what we've got on the board. Talk to me about the favorites in USA.
Great team here. Like most of the top of the conferences, what it comes down to is, do I want to tie up my money in a team that basically needs to go perfect, have no injuries, and then if they're you're playing them in the conference title or something like that, you're really not getting paid out. So hard team to talk about future-wise, similar to the other conferences we spoke about. But roster-wise, there's a lot to like here. Of course, you retain the same coaching staff. You've got your quarterback returning. There's not many teams that can say that in this conference. But Caleb Williams, reigning Heisman. Of course, he's the favorite again this year, favorite to be the #1 overall draft pick. Having that with Lincoln Riley is it should be a huge boon to this program again this year. And they barely missed out on the playoff last year, shot themselves in the foot right at the end against Utah. Hopefully they can clear that this year. But you look at the rest of the roster, you lose Travis Dye at running back. I think that's fine. You get Marshawn Lloyd from South Carolina coming over. Austin Jones is back. You lose Jordan Addison at receiver. That's a first-round draft pick. But a ton of guys return. Mario Williams, Taj Washington, Brennan Rice. You had Dorian Singer from Arizona. That was a top 3 receiver in the conference last year. So very, very good player there. 3 really high recruits. Zechariah Branch is going to play in some capacity early for this team. You do recruit the #1 tight end in Deuce Robinson. Offensive line, I think, is the biggest concern here. You only return 2 full-time starters. A couple other guys played at least 200 snaps just because of injuries. And then you do get Jarrett Kingston. He was the best offensive lineman for Washington State. I think maybe you take a slight step back. This team was 10th in pass blocking last year, so that's a pretty high bar to clear. I think if there's a weakness on offense, it's the O-line. The defense is the biggest concern. We've heard the concerns with Grinch. We'll see here. They do lose one defensive back. That was Mekhi Blackman. He got drafted, so that's a big loss. And they lose one defensive lineman who got drafted as well, but they're returning a lot of guys here. They portaled in 7 other guys, 4 starters return in their secondary. That unit was 58th in coverage per Pro Football Focus, so it wasn't terrible. You hope with another year of starting experience that probably improves. I think this defense is going to jump into the top 50. The question for me is, with a top 50 defense, is that enough to overcome the other players in the Pac-12? Is that enough to make the playoff and potentially win a game here? And I don't really see it. I don't like their win total because their schedule is hard. You play almost everybody who's difficult in the Pac-12. You play Notre Dame in the non-con. You could see 2 losses there. I don't think this team has the roster to win the Natty, but plus 250 to make the playoff. If they can take care of business in the Pac-12, that's probably where I'm looking. But tough team to bet here. Think they're the favorite in the Pac-12 for a reason, but I don't think they're a live contender in the actual national title picture.
Yeah, I mean, sitting at flat 10, a lot of push, they're going to land on 10-2 quite a bit. It's a weird schedule when you look at it. They really, barring something catastrophic, should be undefeated going into the Notre Dame game. I mean, there's really no one early that's going to cause them problems. They also only, and I don't know, you know more about this stuff than I do. They only play 3 non-con games. Is that
Yeah,
a
that's the
pack?
whole conference.
Yeah, see, this is why they're disbanding this. You can't be doing that. That's very shady. I'm not a fan of that. But you know what? It does make where you're going to get the majority. They've got Utah and Oregon and Washington and Notre Dame on the schedule. Those are probably the losable games. I, I really don't have a ton to say here. I guess you could bet them, like you mentioned, to make the playoff. They can survive a loss if they win the Pac 12 and, maybe some other things happen. But there's not much else to really talk about with this team. I mean, for me, is there anything else you want to mention with USC before we move on?
The last thing, just the conference as a whole. The one concern I have with that plus 250 to make the playoff bet is this conference does not get prioritized.
No.
You're going to see SEC teams get in ahead of these teams. Same with Big Ten. So if you do get tripped up, USC comes in with a loss. They could still maybe make it depending on the scope of the rest of the landscape. But I mean, 2 losses, any team with 2 losses is stone dead in this conference unless there's pure chaos.
Yeah, that's not happening. No doubt about that. But they are the most likely representative. It's not them. It could be the Fighting Bo Nixes, the Oregon Ducks. They're sitting at a 9.5 win total, 3-1 to win the Pac-12. They've got some pieces, no doubt about it. It's a coin toss win total. Do you have any action here?
I like this team to make the playoffs a little bit more. I think they're narrowly behind USC, and I think they could make the conference title game. And then if they get through USC with 1 loss, I think they're probably in the playoff. But to break down their roster a little bit, not as much continuity. That starts with their OC. They lose Dillingham, of course, goes to Arizona State. You do bring in Will Stein. I like Will Stein. He was UTSA's offensive coordinator. He has experience with dual threats. Of course, he coached Frank Harris over there. On offense, you do return a ton. So this is going to be a high-powered offense. I think you're going to be in a lot of shootouts, especially, with like USC, teams like that. Bo Nix is back. He probably would have went to New York. I think if he didn't get hurt, I think you probably would have saw him up, not winning the Heisman, but maybe he would have made it over Stetson Bennett. A late season ankle injury kind of put a cap on his stats at the end of the year, but really productive season for Bo Nix. I wasn't expecting it. But Oregon fans should be pleasantly surprised and excited this year. Top 2 backs return, Bucky Irving, Noah Whittington. That's a great group. You do lose Dante Thornton and Chase Cota on the outside at receiver, but your number 1 receiver, Troy Franklin, is back. They portaled some really good players here. Tez Johnson from Troy, great G5 player. You get Gary Bryant from USC. He showed flashes before transferring. And Trayshawn Holden, really good recruit from Alabama. I think they're upgraded at receiver. Get a couple tight ends back. You do lose 4 offensive linemen. So similar to USC, this is a concern. 2 guys started last year. You do get Junior Angelau from Texas. He is starting experience. And I don't know a lot about this guy, but Cornelius from Rhode Island, according to ranking services, this was one of the best tackles in the transfer portal. I obviously didn't watch any Rhode Island games.
Shame.
And you see an FCS guy coming up, you're like, all right, can he make the jump to Power 5? But for whatever reason, ranking services really like this Cornelius guy. So I tend to follow them. And then you get Strother from East Carolina. So you do have some pretty good transfers on the offensive line. They were 4th in pass blocking last year. So like USC, I think they probably take a slight step back. Defense should be strong. Love the transfers here. Birch from South Carolina. You do lose DJ Johnson on the defensive line, so hopefully that helps. He was drafted. I think linebacker is going to be strong. Justin Jacobs comes in. And then defensive back, you're really just looking for a replacement for Christian Gonzalez, who was drafted. They added 1 million transfers. They got some 4-stars. Kyrie Jackson from Bama, Nico Reed from Colorado, Evan Williams from Fresno State, Tyshim Johnson from Ole Miss. Pretty quality unit here. I'm not sure they'll ascend to 25th, but I really do like this roster, and I like the portal additions they made. If they can keep that offensive line healthy and keep Bo Nix healthy because of it, I like this team, and I think they're a decent long shot to win the Pac-12 and make the playoff at plus 500. They get USC at home, got a couple other tough road games in conference at Washington and Utah, but this is a pretty good schedule overall.
I'm pretty content with it as well. Over 9.5 at even money. You mentioned their schedule. Texas Tech in week 2 is a losable game. We haven't done the Big 12 yet, but I've looked at that team and they definitely have the talent to win that. Won't be a lopsided spread, no doubt about it. Oregon should win the game, but you could lose that. They need that game because if they can get that, they're going to be, I would say, pretty definitely 5-0 heading into Washington, and then we'll see what they're really made of. But Bo Nix does provide some stability. You mentioned all those transfers. If even a couple work out, I think they're poised to definitely get to double-digit wins, and I can get down with this over. And then the third team kind of in this Pac-12 that maybe could factor in on a more national level, I think, would be Washington, who also has 9.5 wins, a little more juice to the under, but they've got Penix and they've got some firepower. How much of a drop-off is there between USC, Oregon, and Washington?
I think there's a decent drop off. And, with all these teams at the top, they're pretty difficult to bet. You see them generally appropriately priced. So trying to give you potential plays, if you're like an Oregon fan or a USC fan, where I would go with my money, I'm probably not going to take either team to make the playoffs. I haven't so far, but that's what I like the most. This Washington team has a lot of continuity here. They're another team similar to USC with coaching staff returning, Penix back at QB. You'd love to see that. Penix had an awesome year, seeing some Heisman hype for him. I don't like those bets. I'm actually really surprised he's getting so much Heisman hype. I don't know what else he'd possibly have to do to win that award, and he wasn't even close to it last year, so don't love that. You add Dylan Johnson from Mississippi State at running back. I think that's a fantastic addition. Tons of experience catching the ball in that Mike Leach system. You return your top 3 receivers, top 4 really. Giles Jackson's also back. Plus you sniped a former 4-star recruit from Michigan State in Jeremy Bernard. These are solid players. Their receiver room goes 6-7 deep. Both your tight ends are back. You lost 4 on the offensive line, but you returned both your tackles. And then you had 2 interior guys that got over 200 snaps because of injuries. So you're quietly actually pretty experienced there. And the final starter, Julius Boilo, he played 300 snaps in 2021. So you quietly kind of have like 5 guys who've played despite losing 4 starters. You also get a couple 4-star recruits and a former 4-star in Jalen Clem from Kansas State's 2022 recruiting class. I think the offensive line is not better than last year, but I don't think it's as big of an issue as people are making it out to be. Similar to USC, I mean, the defense was horrific last year. This is the biggest concern. They were 105th in total defense, just a pure shootout team. The big question with Washington overall is how high can they actually climb? Their entire defensive line, the returners at least, they all played at least 380 snaps. They were pretty good in pass rush. I think they'll be better against the run. That was a major concern. You lose a couple DBs here, 2 starters on the back end, but you do add Jabbar Muhammad from Oklahoma State. Thad Dixon comes from JUCO. They were 112th in coverage last year. So you got 3 starters. You're kind of relying on 1 transfer. I don't think their secondary is going to be much better. Could they maybe jump to the top 100? Sure, but this team is going to get absolutely destroyed through the air against USC, against Oregon's. I mean, they dodged UCLA, which is a positive, but man, this secondary is brutal, and I don't think they really addressed it. So that's why I do believe that they're a bit of a step back compared to the other teams in this conference.
You mentioned the shootout potential for sure. This team fits that mold. I don't have a lot of interest in the 9.5. If I bet it, it would be the under, just because I feel very strongly that at best they're probably going to go 2-2 in the USC, Oregon State, type matchups. There's one more good team here that's and Utah, like those type of teams. I worry about that. I would say, I just want to quickly address their non-con and then we can move on. Boise State, Tulsa, and Michigan State, those are not jackass teams, but they're not. I assume they'll be pretty sizable favorite in all 3.
Yeah, I think so, especially with what Michigan State showed against them last year. They do
Yeah.
travel to East Lansing, but I don't think that matters. We'll talk about that roster tomorrow. Goodness gracious.
Yes, we will. But we move on here before, because we're going to keep it going. We're getting to every single team. I do want to say, if you're getting ready for the season, obviously watching these shows get you prepped. But one other way that you can get ready is making sure that you have all your accounts in order. And what do I mean by that? college football, all these sports, the ability to shop these numbers, to pick off openers, to have options is massive. And if you haven't signed up on as many books as you can, or you're just looking for a new book, I do want to quickly show you guys what BetMGM has going on. You see it right here on the screen. You're going to get paid back up to $1,000 in bet credits. The link is below. You also will get 2 free months of our Discord. Some of our great guys in there talking through things, dropping plays, not just in football, but in baseball, anything that you guys want. But really getting on another book, I can't speak to how important that is during the season. It can make the difference between wins and losses, profit and losses for the year. So the link is below. Really, really, really would encourage people to do that and maximize your potential, because some of these teams, these lines will drastically differ as we work down, especially. Okay, the fourth team in this conference is Utah in terms of the win total. They, as you mentioned, prevented maybe the Pac-12 from having a playoff team last year. Utah's always a hard-nosed team. Their win total sits at 8.5. Are they a serious threat, or are they just kind of a spoiler in this conference?
I don't believe they're a serious threat, and largely this comes down to Cam Rising's ACL injury. He tore it in the bowl game. We're talking about a guy who's going to be far less than a year removed from an ACL tear. He's not practicing right now. I don't think he plays in week 1, and I don't know when he returns. A lot of times ACL tears take a year or more to recover from. I don't think it's out of the question that Cam Rising doesn't play at all this year. We don't know this. You're not going to get really good injury reporting, especially coming out of Utah. They're going to keep this close to their chest, but I don't know when Rising returns. If they don't have him, we're looking at a massive drop off in quarterback play for this team. I already bet Florida in week 1 at +8. I'd be looking at some of their other opponents. They got Baylor in week 2. So, I mean, this is not an easy schedule whatsoever for Utah. Maybe they decide to try to hold him back till conference play starts, so then, they can still prioritize winning that conference. But this, I'm shocked, utterly shocked that this is at 8.5 wins with Rising's injury status. I mean, we'll get in the rest of the roster in a second, but do you view that any differently?
No, I really don't, just because he is quietly, I think we're both pretty big fans of him. Like, he's an elite. It's not like, oh, he's just their starting quarterback. Like, he kind of makes that team go. And we'll get into the roster in a second. I'll just say this. Looking at their schedule, they got all sorts of tough games on the road. I mean, you're not walking through where you're going to be underdog in a lot of games this year, not to mention Florida's no joke, Baylor's no joke, and non-con. So, I mean, Utah's had such a strong front for a while now without Rising. Like, how do you think they operate on both sides of the ball?
If Rising misses time, I think they're firmly going to go to ground and pound. That makes sense. They're strong at running back. Jaquindon Jackson, former quarterback, he showed a lot of juice last year. You have Micah Bernard back as a pass catching back. I think that's the strength of their team anyway. They're not exactly a dynamic passing attack. You do return Devon Vele and Money Parks. Those are 2 of their top 4 receivers last year. But Micah Pittman comes in, Emery Simmons. Those are just meh transfers. Simmons especially has never done anything. You do have a pretty good 4-star in Mikey Matthews, who should play for this team. He's a freshman. Tight end strong. Even with Kincaid gone, you still have Brant Keithy coming back from injury. And Thomas Yasmin got a lot of snaps last year because of the Keithy injury. Lose 2 on the offensive line. You've got 3 projected returning starters. Another 4th player has over 300 snaps. Their offensive line, I think, is decent. They were in the 20s in run blocking, but they were outside the top 80 in pass blocking. I think they'll be a little better than that, but how high can they rise here? Their defense was 47th, and their defensive line is pretty deep, but last year they were 74th in run defense, 76th in pass rush. A common thing you're going to hear this offseason is how good Utah's defensive line was. They need a jump from these guys. They were not good last year. This is a below average defensive line, run defense, and pass rush. Now, this is a fantastic coaching staff at developing the defensive line, developing defense in general. So I do think they take a step. But, is this team going to jump from basically 75 at both to top 50, or are they going to jump to top 25? I think opposing teams can run on Utah right now. We'll see how this pans out. But I don't see this team jumping 50 spots in run defense and pass rush. Their strength was actually their secondary. And now you're losing Clark Phillips. That's an NFL corner. You do return 2 starting corners and 2 safeties with experience, but I don't think they live up to 32nd in coverage. So aside from Rising, I have concerns on the defensive side of the ball. You lose your best corner. A lot of these teams are just, like we talk about their fronts. USC is going to throw over the top of you. Like Oregon's going to throw over the top of you. Washington's going to throw over the top of you. Teams like Arizona are going to throw over the top of you. You can't be losing guys like Clark Phillips in the secondary. So I don't like this team to begin with. I'm flirting with an under, but I haven't played it yet because right now I'm just betting every team against them in the first couple games of the year because their lines aren't accounting for Cam Rising. And you're finally seeing that starting to play out in the point spreads. It took Florida +8. I think that's going to go below 7 here soon.
Last question before we move on. Is there any way that Rising starts the year?
Yeah, I think there is, but he has not been practicing yet.
Okay. That's something to keep
we're like working with probabilities here. I think it's unlikely, but not completely out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I just at Baylor, at USC, at Washington, at Arizona, home to Oregon. That's a lot of tough games, not to mention the Florida game. UCLA is on the schedule. I like under 8.5 here. Of the 4 teams we've talked about so far, this is my favorite bet of the bunch. And let's see what we can find as we work down because Oregon State also has an 8.5 win total. This team has made real strides. I know, Corvallis isn't as glamorous maybe as where the Ducks are. They're kind of the little brother, but this is a team that is deadly at home. And they've really, like I said, made some strides. I'm very fascinated to hear what you have to say about Uagalele coming in and whatnot. Talk to me about Oregon State and how you think they factor in this year.
I like this team. I haven't bet anything yet. I'm considering over 8.5 at plus money, though. Same coaching staff. Uagalele comes in to compete with Ben Gulbranson. So you have 2 quarterbacks that have experience. And I think Uagalele offers a lot more upside. Former 5-star. He lost a lot of weight, which might sound like a joke, but that kind of helped his rushing a lot last year. This was a very efficient quarterback on the ground. We know Oregon State wants to run the ball. So having that extra juice here, because last year with Chance Nolan and Gulbranson, that wasn't exactly a threat. Now with Uagalele, it's definitely going to be. Your running backs, Damian Martinez, the stud freshman from last year, he's back. You also returned to Sean Fenwick for depth. You do lose Trayshawn Harrison and Tyjon Lindsey at receiver. But I went back and I did a deep dive on these receivers. I was shocked at how good Anthony Gold was. He was top 10 in the conference in yards per route run. Small sample size. This team is extremely run heavy. So maybe that regresses a little bit. But man, Anthony Gold was shockingly pretty good for this team. So I don't think their receiving room is going to be a strength. I don't think it's going to be a weakness either. Whereas when I started this breakdown, I thought it might be a weakness. Offensive line's awesome. 5 former starters here. This team's going to be elite. Defense was 29th. This is probably the biggest concern. Lost 3 defensive backs, 2 linebackers, 1 defensive tackle. Now, their defensive line should be great. You lose just 1 starter there. 4 guys returned with solid experience. You were 27th in run D. Don't see that dropping off. Their pass rush was an issue, 110th. I think some of that's by design. So hopefully you could get a jump into the top 100. Linebacker, you lose Omar Spates. That's tough. Huge loss there. You do bring in Calvin Hart and Omatosho from Wyoming. So you're going to try to fill the void, probably a slight step back. Secondary is decent. You lose 3 starters here, but you return both your safeties and a nickel with starting experience. I don't think a lot of teams are going to try to throw the ball over Oregon State. We'll see. They're going to play slow, run heavy. So I don't know if a lot of teams are going to get the chance, which is kind of what we saw last year. They're going to hold the ball and keep it away from you. But ultimately, 19th in coverage. They're probably going to take a slight step back there. So we'll see how they do fare against the Oregon and Washington. They do not have USC, which is big. So schedule seems reasonable here. I mean, non-con, really easy. You could probably go 10-2 a lot of times if you split the tough games in the Pac-12. I mean, we'll see. How do you view the schedule?
Yeah, the schedule is definitely favorable. You got to go on the road to Oregon in the last game of the year, but your next toughest games, Washington and Utah, both at home. That's huge for this team. Again, they have massive splits, really tough to beat on their field. There should be, barring something catastrophic, 3-0 in non-con. They're gonna have to get knocked off by even UCLA, who's the team we're going to talk about next. They get them at home. So, you're going to have to lose some home games for you not to clear 8.5. I think my bigger question, kind of to keep it moving here, because I don't think you want to do both, is would you rather bet Oregon State over or bet UCLA over 8.5 wins, which is the next team? Because even though they lost DTR, who we already saw tearing up the preseason, UCLA is, I don't think, going to be that bad by any stretch. So I kind of want your thoughts as we talk about UCLA here. What do you make of them? And do you think over 8.5 for them is more the move?
I think they're both okay. Like you said, I probably wouldn't play both. And one last thing, Oregon State gets Utah in week 5. I love teams that play Utah early, just less likely you're going to see rising. But with UCLA, you do have more concerns, quite a few more, I think, and a lot of room for error. So I would rather play Oregon State. But to kind of get into the schedule here, the team, I suppose, you do have a new OC, Brennan Marion. It's a Texas pass game coordinator. So a lot of good experience with solid signal callers there. Quarterback's a question. I don't know who's going to start for this team. It appears 5-star freshmen Dante Moore and Ethan Garbers are locked into a competition. Colin Schlee has fallen behind in the competition from Kent State. I don't think he wins it. So I would love it if they just play Dante Moore immediately. I think he offers a lot more upside. We'll see if that actually happens. Running back, you do not have Zach Charbonnet anymore. They do go to the portal, bring in Ball State running back Carson Steele. He was awesome, but he was also awesome at Ball State. This is probably the biggest jump you can make in terms of G5 to Power 5. We'll see if he can do it. You lose Jake Bobo, Casimir Allen. Those are your top 2 receivers. They do add J. Michael Sturdivant from Cal. That's a great addition. Kyle Ford comes from USC, so I think they'll be fine. Offensive line only has 2 returners. You're going to be relying heavily on transfers here. This is a unit that was really good last year, 35th in pass blocking, great in the run. That's a question. Are they going to be quite as good on the O-line? I think they'll take a slight step back, maybe around 50th. That's tough with young quarterbacks. Defense was 54th. You lose 3 DBs, 1 defensive tackle. And the biggest concern here is all your DBs that you lost were quality players here. Now you're going to be turning to the portal. And I mean, like, Jordan Anderson from Bowling Green's projected to start here. I know this UCLA team prides themselves on watching more MAC than any other team, at least according to Chip Kelly. But I mean, I don't want to be turning to Bowling Green starters in my secondary. They were 43rd in coverage last year. I think they take a step back. We'll see if they can figure out these safeties. That's where they're losing most of their production. I think linebacker is good. Front 7 should be good. The problem is they were 85th in run defense, so you can run on this team. I mean, we'll see. When it comes down to UCLA versus Oregon State, I just have more questions with UCLA. And it's kind of across the board. It's not just quarterback. It's Carson Steele. It's the offensive line. It's the secondary with these MAC starters. I'd rather play Oregon State if you're just playing one.
I would too. You're also getting plus money on Oregon State. This team reminds me of our ACC breakdowns where it's just like, I have 5 or 6 games that I think are going to be coin flips for UCLA. If they get the majority of them, they could claw to 9 and 10. I also think there are serious ways that UCLA wins like 5 games this year, and they have nothing gels. They can't find the right quarterback. I would be shocked if Oregon State doesn't have a nice, like 7 and 5 at the very worst. They're going to be a quality team. I think this team has some variance. I do think, though, there's a chance they could be really good. It's just that type of team. So for a win total, I don't like it at minus 115. I would rather do something kind of crazy with them if I was going to do something, maybe take them to knock off some big teams or bet them to go deep in the conference.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's less variance with Oregon State, more variance with UCLA, which is maybe why you should consider them 14-1 to win the Pac-12. Shop that, of course, but they get a pretty good runway into their schedule. 3 easy non-con. You play Coastal, my love, but they're going to be Coastal. San Diego State, awful. North Carolina Central, and then you play Utah in your first game. You do go there, but that's week 4. We'll see Cam Rising's status. Then you go to Washington, or you play Washington State at home. I don't like that team. We'll get into them, but if they can figure out this quarterback situation and go for the upside, I mean, that's not the hardest start to conference play.
No doubt about it. You just mentioned them. This is where it really drops off. Washington State is up next. 6.5 wins is the number we're looking to evaluate. I love all things Incarnate Word. I'm a big fan of what goes on down there. We got Cam Ward, who came in and he's back. But I'll tell you what, I gave this team a pretty good once over before the show, and I didn't like what I saw at all from this squad. Are you high on them, low on them? What do you think of Washington State this year?
I'm low on them, but I think that's more going to appear in how I view some of the other teams in the bottom half of this conference in their win total versus me actually wanting to make a play with Washington State. I do think they're appropriately priced. And to kind of get into it, you just have so much change everywhere. You're replacing both coordinators for the second straight year. Ben Arbuckle, really cool new OC. I think he's 27 years old. He's like one of the youngest coordinators in football, if I'm not mistaken. But
That's wild.
anyway, the offense is going to be changing again. The defense is going to be changing again. Love Cam Ward. Maybe in the second year of FBS Power 5, he can make an improvement. I think your running backs are fine. Nakia Watson, Jalen Jenkins, these guys aren't anything special. You look at their yards after contact, forced missed tackles. Quality college starters, not difference makers, not winning you games. You lose your top 4 receivers. This is a huge concern for an offense that wants to run air raid. You don't really have any quality replacements. Lincoln Victor's back, Leighton Smith, but your transfers are all just rotational guys from small schools. Josh Kelly from Fresno State, Kyle Williams from UNLV, Isaiah Hamilton from San Jose State, DT Sheffield from JUCO. Are any of these guys ones, or do we just have like 6 wide receiver 3s on this team? And I kind of think that's what we have. Offensive line lost 2 starters. This unit wasn't great last year. They were 78th in pass blocking, and they lost their best player. So one of those departures is Jarrett Kingston. He's at USC now. Their defense is awful, 74th last year. Their edge is back, so they have a ton of guys returning on the edge, but that unit was 111th in pass rush. Again, where's their jump? Their interior is awful. They don't have anyone who played more than 300 snaps last year. They got gutted at linebacker. They're going to be relying on transfers, Devin Richardson and Ahmad McCullough. Richardson barely has any experience. DB, you return both your safeties in one corner. I think those guys are fine, but you basically just raided the JUCO ranks for replacements. You got 3 JUCO transfers coming in here, a Utah State kid and a South Florida kid. They were 45th last year. I don't think they live up to that. And again, like some of these teams at the bottom of the conference are rebuilding. I could see them getting torched by Arizona. I mean, we'll see here, but I don't think it's going to be easy going for Washington State. The only thing that's keeping me away from betting the under here is just that severe juice. It's minus 165. So, I mean, we might as well be talking about like a 6-win, 5.5 win total. Schedule-wise, you get Wisconsin and non-con too. Huge revenge spot. They upset Wisconsin last year. Not an easy schedule. I don't know if this team goes bowling. I'd be betting against it.
I would too. You mentioned the line minus 165 is not great. Want to shop that? Keep an eye on it. I would, if it moved to 6 and it was, a much better line, which it obviously would be, it still might look under because I really don't see a ton of wins. You've got Northern Colorado and Colorado State. That should be 2. You've got Stanford, Cal, Colorado, and Arizona State. Even if they got all of them, that's 6. I'm not sure they get all of those, and I really don't know if they're going to get any others. So I'm really just not a fan of this team. Like all these teams, I think they'll score. I like their quarterback. I don't like anything else though. And I think it's just not the best schedule, even dodging USC. And this is where, like I said, it starts to really, really go down. We dropped from 6.5. Now we're in Cal. 80-1 to win the Pac-12. Is that something you might be interested in with the old Cal Bears, or can they even claw to win more than 5 games, which is a more realistic evaluation here? Talk to me about Cal. Are they even relevant?
I don't think they're relevant. This was the first win total I bet in all of college football.
Oh,
it's still my favorite one. It's Cal under 5 wins. It's the number 1 win total I'd bet in all of college football right now.
wow.
Got a new OC. Spavital comes in, former Texas State head coach. I think that's fine. I just don't think he's working with anything. Sam Jackson comes in from TCU at signal caller. He's a good runner. We haven't seen him throw the ball at all. I'm not even 100% sure he wins the job. You've got Jaden Ott at running back. I mean, can you rely entirely on him? Receivers decent. You do lose J. Michael Sturdivant, Jeremiah Hunter, and Marvin Anderson are back. You've got some pretty good recruits here, but I think it all goes downhill once you get beyond the receiver position. Your offensive line lost one starter. That might be a negative. 6 guys started games for this unit last year, but they were atrocious. They were 122nd on the offensive line. Is having 6 of these guys back a solid for them? They probably improve a little bit year over year. That's just what happens in college football. But are they even top 100? I don't think so. Defense was 125th. You're basically rating other programs of starters who haven't played but are decent recruits. For example, you get like David Reese from Florida, Sergio Allen from Clemson, no experience there. And they don't have a ton of transfers on defense. You do have a fair amount, but I mean, you're relying a lot on either guys who haven't been able to do it at Power 5 levels, or you're going down to JUCO ranks, or you're going down to like Noah Williams from UNLV, or Patrick McMorris for San Diego State. Those guys have starting experience, but we're talking about Mountain West starting experience. And that's a lot of that's in your secondary. Now you're going up against Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, Michael Penix. These guys are going to get raided through the air. Under 5 wins, I think, is one of the best bets here. That's before we even look at the schedule. Auburn and non-con, that's tough. They got a weird game. They're going to North Texas. I don't know how that works out. But I think they're going to lose to all of the important teams in the Pac-12. You've got Washington, Oregon State, Utah, USC, Oregon, and UCLA. So you got all of the top 6. That's bad. And then I don't think they beat teams like Arizona State. I think they're going to lose to teams in the middle range of this conference. So under 5, it's the best bet in all of college football, in my opinion.
Look at that. Yeah, I mean, just as an indication, it's just one data point, and maybe it's wrong, but I trust the books. They got North Texas as a fighting chance dog. It's inside 10 points. And if you're not able, even on the road, you better hope you get that, because this is stone dead 0% chance if Cal loses their first game. They will not get to 6 if they cannot beat North Texas. I can guarantee that. If Stanford wins a game, this is not a hot take, but I like to say one of these and preface it with, this is not a hot take. If Stanford wins a conference game, it will be against Cal. Rivalry game at Stanford. I think that's the type of game that they could get clipped. And again, you are counting Stanford as a win if you're a Cal backer here. I will also say, and I know the answer to this, I saw some 5.5s out there for this number. It was juiced, but clearly I'm assuming you're more than content with that if you want a little more cushion.
For sure. I grabbed 5.5 earlier, so I'm kind of lucky, but
it's moved down. But I'm with you here. This is one you got me on early, and I still think there's plenty of value here at 5 because this team's got all sorts of issues. Now we get to a mystery team. They also have a 5-win total, but I view this team so differently than what we just talked about. And the team I'm talking about is Arizona, who's got some flashes, who's got some upside. I don't think they're going to factor in, the big picture, but talk to me about Arizona and their 5-win total this year.
I love this team. We were on them last year. I think we had their win total at 3.5. Bet them in a ton of spots throughout the year. Had them in the opener against San Diego State. So this is a team that we are already liked, and a lot of it stemmed just from what Jed Fish is doing as the head coach. He's actually recruiting well for a team like Arizona, who's kind of been in the dumpster. They returned their signal caller, Jaden DeLora. So similar to USC, similar to Washington, you've got the coaching staff returning and your quarterback, which is a positive. Running back strong. Michael Wiley, DJ Williams, Jonah Coleman, and Rayshawn Luke are all back. Receiver strong. You lose Dorian Singer, but you still have a couple guys in Jacob Cowing and Tet McMillan who should be able to at least provide quality targets for DeLora. Not to mention you add Montana Lamonius Craig from Colorado, who got run out of there. He was one of their better players. I was actually surprised Deion ran him out. So he should be able to fill some of that void. I don't think he's as good as Dorian Singer, but ultimately this should be a good passing attack. Tight end Tanner McLaughlin's back. 4 offensive line return. You've got experience across the board here. Even, their replacement, Wendell Moe, he started 4 games last year. They recruited a 4-star on the offensive line, so good job, Arizona. You don't see that every day. Defense was 130th. My notes literally are, how could this team get any worse? Their defense cost them a ton of games last year, and they portaled like crazy. You've got over 10 portal additions here, and I think you're probably going to see like 6 of them start. And a lot of these guys are pretty decent. Like Justin Flo from Oregon at linebacker. This was a high-profile recruit who's coming to this defense. You have a couple other guys who I think are going to sort of fill this role, like Daniel Haimuli from Washington, another really good recruit here coming in. Biggest concern for me is the secondary. Still think this team is probably going to be in their fair share of shootouts, but I do think they'll be a little better against the run, especially with some of the guys they added in the front seven. So to me, it's an improved team, but when you break it down, I mean, kind of a tough schedule. Mississippi State and non-con. I think you're probably 2-1 in non-con. You play 5 of the top 6 teams in the conference. You're going to be pretty decent underdogs in all 6. So immediately you're not working with a ton of wiggle room. It kind of comes down to how they perform against the middle range of this conference. How do they do against teams like Colorado? And they play Arizona State, of course, in the rivalry game at the end of the year. That's on the road. If I were betting it, I like over. But what I think I'm going to do is play Arizona as a dog against some of the top end teams in this conference. And, we saw them clip Washington last year. So that's something that is certainly live here if that defense can get short up a little bit.
It's not the best schedule when you look at it, as you mentioned. I do think they're going to be a serious threat to knock off some teams. But when I bet win totals, as you kind of just alluded to, I'm looking for teams where I can say, okay, all they need to do is take care of business. And, if they get 1 or 2 extras, that's great. This team can do that, but it's very thin margins, even if we do think they're improved. They got a lot of places where they're going to be dogs on the schedule. You're going to have to beat like a Washington State, Colorado, as you mentioned, Arizona State types, or maybe go and get one against UCLA or Utah style. But for me, it's more, I trust Arizona, certainly more than a Cal team. But I'm not sure this is going to make my card overall because we still have a couple more teams. We got 3 more teams in this conference to get to. I just want to say again quickly, always, if you're looking for more content, right here on Odd Chopper, but you can follow us on Twitter, Matt_Gajeski at JazzRazDFS. We're available leading up to the season. We're going to be doing all sorts of college football breakdowns here. Again, we just want you as part of the team, no matter what it is. If you want data, if you want picks, if you want promos, just be part of the Odd Chopper family. Again, the links are below for everything that you may want. You may not want all of it, but I guarantee you'll want some of it. And now we get to the Fighting Herm Edwards, even though not really anymore. Arizona State, another team with 5 wins as their Vegas total, I should say. It is juiced to the under. I think people think this team is going to be pretty bad. Do you think that? Or do you see that maybe this team could surprise some people?
Yeah, I like Arizona State. I think I made a mistake with Arizona quick. I said they knocked off Washington. They actually knocked off UCLA. So I don't remember what I said. But anyway, sorry about that. Wanted to correct it. Arizona State. Basically, with the bottom half of the Pac-12, the 2 teams I like the most are Arizona and Arizona State. I think they should both be ranked ahead of Washington State. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think people are ranking Arizona State in particular a little lower because of all of the change in their roster. And when you look at that against Washington State, I don't really see it being a huge difference here. You have 2 programs with a ton of change, but then I look to the additions they're making, and I think Arizona State has been a lot more aggressive with their roster compared to Washington State. You bring in Kenny Dillingham, he's going to recruit his ass off. He's coming from Oregon. And then you've got OC Bo Baldwin. I like him. He's the former Cal Poly head coach. Brian Ward, they sniped him from Washington State as the DC. I think the biggest reason you don't see them ahead of teams like Washington State is the quarterback situation. Who are we getting? Are we getting Drew Pine? Are we getting Trenton Bourguet? Are we getting Jaden Rashada? Rashada, obviously the former Florida commit. He comes over to Arizona State after the NIL debacle. I mean, his brother is on this team, so I don't think it was entirely that. But Rashada has gotten some first-team work in fall camp already, which I don't hear a lot of people talking about. Because similar to UCLA, if we get Rashada under the helm, I think that gives you a ceiling. Maybe he sucks. We don't know. But I think we know what we have in Drew Pine. Nothing special. Trenton Bourguet flashed a little bit. We'll see. But I think by far Rashada has the highest ceiling, which gives me some optimism in this offense. You lose Xavier Valade at running back, but you do add DeCarlos Brooks from Cal, Cameron Scatibo from Sac State. He was a great FCS runner. Your top receivers are back. Elijah Badger's back. Giovanni Sanders is back. They added a lot of really good transfers at wide receiver here. Xavier Gilroy from Idaho State. This is a premier FCS kid. Even if you don't trust the FCS level jumping to Power 5, Troy O'Meara, former 4-star from Texas. Jordan Tyson, one of the better Colorado players last year that got ran off. You have guys like Jake Smith. He was a former four-star, played at USC in Texas. He's over here now. Melquan Stovall. He redshirted last year at Colorado State because he wasn't happy with the direction the team was taking, but a very experienced player. Their receivers are better, so whoever plays quarterback has good weapons. Both your tight ends are back. You have two starters on the offensive line. Your interior is going to be filled with some transfers, but they got some pretty decent ones here. Ben Coleman from Cal. You have Bram Walden from Oregon as far as like the higher end guys. And then you have former starters in Lee Fatanu from UNLV and Aaron Frost from Nevada. Defense is completely rebuilt, and I love this. It's like the opposite of some other teams like Cal, where you return a bunch of bad players. Arizona State was horrible last year. They were 119th in total defense. They gutted the whole thing. I'm not going to break down like all 27 transfers this defense has, but just to sum it up, I think you have a nice blend of upside here between the players you took from high-profile programs and some of the producers you had from FCS and G5 ranks. And there's so many of them that I think you can kind of shuffle them around at times if something doesn't work out and hopefully find something that's serviceable. I'm not expecting a huge jump. If they even got to 75th, I think that would be a drastic improvement, but I find it really hard to believe this team is going to be 119th in total defense again last year. Similar to Arizona, if I were betting Arizona State, it'd be on the over, but I kind of just want to play them within these Pac-12 conference games because I think they're being undervalued, and I think you might have the chance to play them like 3 or 4 times before people catch up.
No doubt, and I like that philosophy with transfers where just give me 20 of them. Some won't work out, some will. They'll find the ones that will. If you have a couple teams, they bring in these dynamite transfers. If that guy doesn't work out, there's a huge void left. But some of these teams just went, we'll take 10 guys to fill these positions. We'll figure it out. I kind of like that strategy, particularly when you're rebuilding. Not sure there's any team that did it as crazy as Colorado, which of all the teams in the entire country, Colorado is the team that I think is the biggest mystery. It's a unique, almost unprecedented situation, I think you could say, with kind of what Dion did. It's just a new team. Obviously, they're not expected to be any good. 3.5 wins, and it is juiced to the under. Do you think that they can make strides and surprise some people, or is this a multi-year rebuilding job?
I think it's a little bit of both. There's a lot of really good high-end talent on the roster. They're betting on players staying healthy for sure. If you get Shedeur Sanders for the whole season, and especially on defense, they're quite thin. They have some pretty good transfers that came in, and then a lot of guys that are really questionable to sort of fill those gaps. If you have good health luck for Colorado, they're winning more than 3.5 games. I just don't know who they're going to come against. And this is a lot. I mean, like, to tie your money up on that for the whole year, it doesn't make much sense to me, which is why I'd rather play them game to game. But I mean, they have a lot of the same things as a team like Arizona State. Dion comes in, love the OC he brought in, Sean Lewis from Kent State. He's their former head coach. Great OC. Like Charles Kelly, DC, formerly with Alabama. Shedeur Sanders is solid, but their 2 backups are freshmen. He needs to stay healthy. He's also making a considerable jump. So I think some of the production of this offense, if not most of it, just hinges on his production here. How much or how quickly does he assimilate to Pac-12 life, Power 5 life? Does he do it? We'll see. You got 3 good backs. Alton McCaskill from Houston, premier freshman, tore his ACL in the 2022 spring game. He should be fully back now. He's almost 18 months removed. Cavassier Smoke from Kentucky, decent change of pace back. Sivion Wilkerson was productive with Jackson State last year. Receiver should be fine. They're upgraded here. 2 USF transfers, Xavier Weaver and Jimmy Horn. Both were really good in the G5. Travis Hunter is going to play receiver situationally. He's one of the most athletic kids in college, former #1 recruit that Dion landed. Javon Antonio, Willie Gaines, Jalen Ellis, Tarvarish Dawson all come in. Dawson's a former top 300 recruit. You have 2 4-star recruits that are freshmen this year. Some of them are going to play. Tight end, I think, is fine. This is a rare occurrence on this Dion roster, but he saw freshmen from last year's Colorado roster, Louis Passarello, kept him, played him in the spring. He was one of the first players to earn his number. I think he's going to start, which is surprising. Offensive line, they returned 2 starters from last year, portaled the hell out of this position. I don't see it being any worse. Defense is the same thing as Arizona State. This team was bottom 2 in every single major defensive category. Power 5, G5 doesn't matter. This is a bottom 2 unit across the board. They gutted it, returning 1 starter here in Trevor Woods. You got a lot of players on this defense. Like, I believe the count currently is 30 transfers. It's probably going to change by the time you view the video, honestly. But you got some good players here. Cormani McLean, 5-star freshman. He's going to play corner opposite Hunter. Miles Slusher is probably going to be your nickel or play one of the safety positions. Demoy Kennedy and Levante Bentley are two huge recruits. Both went to Alabama and Clemson. Couldn't quite carve out roles there. You're getting a lot of players like that. The depth, bad. If one of those guys gets hurt, they're probably going to get gashed. But we'll see here, man. I mean, non-con's not easy. You've got TCU, you've got Nebraska. I think they beat Colorado State, but could this team beat some of the other Pac-12 teams? I think they certainly beat Stanford. Wouldn't be surprised if they knock off Washington State. It's tough to see like 5 wins here, but I think this team's going to be frisky. I think they're going to upset some teams throughout the year. So I'm probably going to try to play them as dogs, similar to the approach with Arizona and Arizona State.
Yeah, they're going to be a tough out for a lot of teams. I wish they had more home games. That's my first observation. Like, I wish they had 8 home games. That would help. They only play 6. And some of them are not great situations because one of them is USC. Yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting team to bet pretty quickly. They're almost a 3-touchdown underdog to TCU. How they fare in that game may go a long way. We might say, wow, they're a lot further ahead of schedule, or they're gonna be good, but you can't just throw this many transfers in and expect it to work quickly. You mentioned the depth, so I'm cautiously waiting. I think this is one of the worst teams to tie up your money, hoping that they get to 4 or seeing if they land on 3. I would much rather go week to week with a team of this caliber. But the last team on the schedule, mercifully, is Stanford. Tough times for Stanford. They used to be a power in this conference. They are certainly not right now. The floor is yours. How many games can Stanford win this year?
1. I think it's against Sac State.
Tough scenes. Are they live to lose that game?
Maybe. I mean, Sac State kind of got raided in the portal. They play Hawaii. Maybe they could win 2. That's at Hawaii, though. We'll see, man. I don't think this team should be drastically favored in any game, including FCS. But, I mean, they're like Virginia. They're like Northwestern. They're not built to win in this era. You can't get into Stanford as a recruit. You can't transfer into Stanford because of the credit situation. A lot of times credits just won't transfer, even if you do have good grades at a Power 5 school. Stanford has different admission practices. You can't get transfers. You can't get recruits. How do you play in the current landscape of the Pac-12? Like one team that is, I think, potentially benefited by the Pac-12's explosion is Stanford. If they end up with a schedule next year in the future where they play a lot of Mountain West teams or something, that's probably where Stanford belongs at this point. They're not a Power 5 program, which sucks for their head coach, Troy Taylor. I don't know what his contract is off the top of my head, but I hope they just paid him the bag because he's probably going to get fired in 3 years. You have no OC. Troy Taylor is going to call the plays. Bobby April comes in from Wisconsin. He was their linebackers coach. He'll be their new DC. You have no clear quarterback after McKee left. I don't know if it's going to be Patu, Daniels, Lamson from Stanford, or Miles Jackson, 4-star. No idea. Running back is Matt. Filkins and EJ Smith return. Neither were particularly good. EJ Smith ranked 2nd on the team in rushing last year. The guy only played in 2 games, which should give you a good indication of how awesome that rushing attack was. You lose your top 3 receivers. You don't have any transfers coming in to fill the void. Your top pass catcher is probably going to be your tight end, Benjamin Urasic. He's solid, but he's 240 pounds, and he's one of the worst blockers in the conference. They're going to use him as a glorified slot receiver. So even there, we're talking limitations at the tight end position. Offensive line got raided. You lost 4 starters here. And again, because of the admissions, they can't portal. So they have 2 transfers coming in. They're from Harvard and Penn. I mean, they're probably going to get worse than 112th, which is where they ranked last year. Defense was 128th. You lose your top 7 defensive backs, 3 linebackers, 2 edges. The player or the position with the most returning production is your defensive tackle, but these guys were all horrific last year. They were terrible against the run. They're not going to be any better. Among all those departures, you only landed 2 transfers, so you're leaning on depth from a previous coaching staff that kind of just neglected recruiting entirely. I think most likely this team wins 2 wins. We'll give them Hawaii, but I mean, I don't know how they get to 3. They lose every conference game, in my opinion.
Yeah, they are, a 9-ish point favorite against Hawaii, which is encouraging. But even if you get the 2, you're going to have to find 2 more. I don't know about that. Yeah, maybe you can push, but what good does that do? Again, we're talking about locking up money for months on end. You better think you have serious value. And I'm not looking to lay minus 160 on the under. I'm not looking to do anything with Stanford. It's going to be pretty bad. I might bet Hawaii in that opening game for Stanford. I'm really not sold on this team, and you kind of spelled it out nicely that they have some serious issues. So we have gone through every team in the Pac-12 here on this episode, but we're not done yet. I want to give a breakdown out there. Let's talk Pac-12 best bets. Couple of bets for the people out there. If you are looking at this conference and you've taken all the teams, what are your favorite win totals that stand out from this conference if you're looking to get down some money before the season starts?
Two favorite win totals are Cal under 5 wins and then Oregon State over. That'll be over 8.5 wins. It's at plus money. For Cal, this team is basically losing their quarterback. You're losing some on the offensive line. The players you do return are all awful. That unit was 122nd last year. Didn't add much on defense. You were 125th there last year. I think they firmly get beat by some of the other middling teams in this conference. And with Oregon State, you add Uagalele at quarterback. You have your running backs back, 5 starters in the offensive line. Defense should be good again. And you won the schedule lottery. You only play 4 of the top 6 teams there, not to mention a winnable non-con. So at plus money, I'll take Oregon State over 8.5.
Two ones I really can't push back at all. You mentioned Cal. Don't like anything about that team. Question marks all over the place. Big fan of Oregon State. I love that. I love teams that can't be beat at home. When you can rattle off all your home games like that, it's very, very difficult to have a bad year. I'm going to throw out one more for the people. It is very juicy, so I understand if you don't want to lay this, make sure you shop it. Again, oddshopper.com. I think Washington State's going to have a tough year. I like their quarterback, and I don't like much else on that team. Under 6.5 wins, it's not a product of me saying I think the team is garbage. Look at their schedule. Look at all the teams that they have to face. It's going to be tough for them to claw to 7, 8 type wins. I think they land on 6 and 5 quite a bit. Minus 165 is a lot, but if you can get that juice down or you're saying you're willing to eat it, I'm still comfortable with that number. So to sum it up, for our Pac-12 best bets, we've got Cal under 5, Oregon State over 8.5, and Washington State under 6.5 wins. Again, if you appreciate this type of content, hit the like button. Make sure you check out all the Betting U episodes and everything else we have here on Odd Chopper. But for me, for Mr. Matt Kajeski, and for all of us here, good luck and joy, and stay tuned for more college football content as the season rapidly approaches.